So last slide. And this is the time in the class where I'm getting tired. And in fact, this is quite exhausting making these videos, especially since behind the scenes, you wouldn't know this. There could be like a gag reel. Many of these videos had to be done multiple times before I was happy with them. And they still have lots of errors in them. Anyway, last slide. So there's one last big point that Foucault makes that I want to draw your attention to. And then one really interesting sort of prescient comment he just sort of makes right at the end, which can be which you can do something with on the forums. Okay, so the big point that he makes that I want to draw attention to is the idea of the transdiscursive author, and he uses both Freud and Marx as examples of transdiscursive authors. And what he means there is that the works of both Freud and Marx, the writing that they produce, which are works, have produced their own kinds of writing. And so people who write following Freud, you don't like, they are Freudians, right? Like Freud's writings produce this whole set of discourse, and a lot of the terminology that he uses just becomes kind of like language, vocabulary that is transdiscursive, that just sort of circulates, even if we don't always have to say, as Freud says in The Interpretation of Dreams, like the idea of the unconscious, for example. Like it's not like Freud invented that word, but the way Freud described that word, the unconscious, as this like set of like repressed feelings that will affect the way we act, even if we don't realize the connection, that idea, we don't have to keep quoting Freud for that idea to just transdiscursively, which means throughout discourse, like trans throughout all kinds of discourse, for that to circulate, right? There's all kinds of terminology from Freud's writing, from Freud's works, also from Marx's works, that affects other writing. And he kind of makes this point in a funny way. Like, so if there was this piece of writing that was discovered, and it, like, say it wasn't even a very good piece of writing, it was kind of this like random sort of thing, or maybe it was even a shopping list, right? Like some like seemingly, disposable piece of writing. If we found out that this was the shopping list of Freud, like, we'd care about it. We'd probably put it in a museum, right? Which is because those authors are so interesting. And in fact, if we found like more than a shopping list, if we found like more sort of thinking through psychology or thinking through human behavior, and we realized that like, oh my goodness, this is the lost writing of Freud, we would care about it and take it seriously, mostly because it was Freud who wrote it, right? Like, and we want to see if this piece of writing, this new work, changed the way we interpreted any of his other works or supplemented it in some way. So he talks about like there's some authors who are bigger than just the links between their name or the person and the works, right? Like that they have produced their own sorts of discourse. So that's the last big idea I wanted to draw your attention to. And then finally, the last point I want to make, and this is like, sort of springboard into forum discussion if you've managed to get through all of these little lectures. Foucault makes this point on the very last page. He says, we can easily imagine a culture where discourse would circulate without any need of an author. And that's on page 138. And the fact is, Foucault, that is where we are now, right? In fact, because of the rise of digital technology, this idea that writing needs to have an author before we take it seriously as writing, or that kind of link, that very narrow link, connection between author and work, like that there are gatekeepers for writing before it gets to be considered work. Like all of those like mechanisms have been challenged or undermined by the World Wide Web. And the question that I have for all of you is this a good thing? Foucault thought it would be a good thing because he didn't like gatekeepers. He didn't like the idea of knowledge being held behind walls. He didn't like that idea at all. He was he was very concerned with the power that comes with holding on to and controlling the flow of knowledge. But we're in a day and age and in a moment right now where the fact that there's lots of writing that circulates and we don't know who wrote it and we don't know their intention for writing it, and we don't know if we can take it seriously, and we don't know if it is helpful, truthful, or destructive, or just like supposed to be funny. Like, none of those mechanisms are firmly in place anymore. And that is proving to be, I would argue, a real problem. Or maybe not. Like, so that's an idea that I think you can pick up on. Like, when Foucault defines the author function, I don't think he thinks that the idea of the author is bad, but he wants to point out how narrow it is and how much the circulation of writing is actually controlled. And now we're in a world where a lot of those handbrakes are off. A lot of those gatekeeping mechanisms are gone. And it's interesting to think about the implications of that. So there you go. There's my Foucault lecture. I've got one more set of lectures to do. This was exhausting though, so I'm going home and I'll do them tomorrow. Okay, bye.